Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something a little unexpected. Today we're exploring how military strategy can actually be applied to everyday life.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of cool, huh? It's not just about battlefields and generals. It's about thinking strategically in any situation, whether it's your career, relationships, or even just getting through a tough day.
Exactly. And to guide us through this fascinating topic, we're tapping into the wisdom of Robert Greene, author of The 33 Strategies of War. He argues that there's this sort of hidden history of military strategy.
Yeah, like it was the secret knowledge, right? Like something out of a movie. Kings and rulers hoarding these powerful insights, only sharing them with a select few.
It's true. He talks about how Sun Tzu's The Art of War was practically treated like a sacred text, locked away and only accessible to a chosen few.
It makes you wonder, why all the secrecy? I mean, what were they so afraid of?
I know, right? You'd think in today's world, with information so readily available, we wouldn't have these kinds of barriers. But Greene argues that this kind of secrecy, this reluctance to share this knowledge with the masses, it still exists in many ways. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think there's still this mystique around military strategy, this perception that it's this exclusive club
Hmm.
for, those elite military types. But Greene's whole point is that this kind of strategic thinking, it's not just for generals and presidents, it's for all of us. He says that, in a way, the world we live in today is more like a battlefield than ever before.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So you're saying that with all the competition we face, the constant pressure to succeed, whether it's at work, in our personal lives, or even online, it's like we're all engaged in these little battles every single day, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Think about it. You're constantly navigating challenges, trying to achieve your goals, and often facing, opposition or competition.
And it's so easy to get stuck in that, like, reactive mode, just trying to keep up with the day-to-day demands.
Right. And Green calls this tactical hell.
Tactical hell, I like that.
Yeah, it's that feeling of being overwhelmed by the day-to-day, so bogged down in just reacting to the latest crisis or, like, urgent email that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
I feel like I'm living in tactical hell half the time.
Well, you're not alone. I think it's a common experience in today's fast-paced world. But, and this is where it gets interesting, Green suggests that the principles of military strategy can actually help us escape that tactical hell and start shaping our lives with more intention.
Okay, so instead of just reacting to whatever life throws at us, we can learn to be more proactive, more strategic in our approach. I like the sound of that, but how do we actually do that? How do we make that shift from tactical hell to, like, strategic thinking in our everyday lives?
Well, Green uses some fascinating historical examples to illustrate these principles in action. One of the most compelling is the story of the legendary samurai Miyamoto Musashi.
Yeah, Musashi, the ultimate swordsman, right?
Exactly. And his duels weren't just about brute force, they were carefully calculated displays of strategy.
I remember reading somewhere that he would often show up late to his duels just to psych out his opponents.
That's right. Like there's this famous duel he had against the Yoshioka clan.
Tell me more about that one. What was it about Musashi's approach that made him such a formidable strategist?
Well, in this duel, his opponents were expecting him to arrive late, as he had done in previous encounters.
So they thought they had him figured out.
Yeah, exactly. They thought they could predict his move, but Musashi, he decided to flip the script.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Instead of arriving late, he arrived early and he actually went into hiding, waiting for them to show up.
Wow. Talk about turning the tables. That's such a power move. I
And
bet they were completely caught off guard.
exactly.
Yeah.
And he ended up defeating them. And this highlights a key principle of military strategy. Don't fight the last war. It means not getting stuck in old patterns, not assuming that what worked in the past will work in the
It's
present.
about being adaptable, right?
Precisely. Always adjusting your strategy based on the current circumstances. And Musashi was a master of this. He understood that the battlefield is constantly changing, and a true strategist needs to be able to adapt and evolve.
So it sounds like Musashi's willingness to break from his own established pattern, to do something unexpected, was actually a strategic masterstroke.
Absolutely. It showed his opponents that he was not predictable, that he couldn't be easily categorized or contained. And this unpredictability, this ability to adapt and improvise, it's a hallmark of any great strategist, wouldn't you say?
I totally agree. And it's not just about being unpredictable for the sake of it. It's about being able to accurately assess the situation, understand your opponent, and then make the most strategic move, even if it goes against conventional wisdom.
Exactly. And this reminds me of another one of Musashi's famous duels, this one against a warrior named Baiken, who was known for his mastery of this, like, unique weapon,
Uh,
a chain steel ball.
oh, wow. A chain steel ball. Okay, now that sounds intense. What kind of strategy do you even use against something like that?
Well, most warriors would have approached the duel armed with the traditional katana, but Musashi knew that wouldn't be enough.
Too predictable. Right.
Exactly. So he decided to switch things up. Instead of one sword, he wielded two.
Wow. Talk about thinking outside the box.
Right, and this unconventional tactic allowed him to defeat Baiken, who was so used to his opponents reacting to his chain steel ball in a certain way. Musashi's adaptability, his willingness to break from tradition, that's what ultimately gave him the upper hand.
These stories about Musashi are so fascinating, but I'm curious how this all ties back to grand strategy, which you mentioned earlier.
Yes. Well, while Musashi definitely exemplifies strategic thinking on, a more micro level on the battlefield, his approach can actually be seen as a kind of microcosm of this larger concept of grand strategy.
So how would you define grand strategy? What does that look like in a more, like, zoomed out sense?
Well, Greene describes it as this ability to see the bigger picture, to understand the larger forces at play, and then craft a strategy that encompasses all of those factors.
So it's not just about winning the current battle, it's about understanding how that battle fits into a larger campaign, a larger vision of the future.
Exactly. It's about thinking long term, anticipating future consequences, understanding the historical and cultural context in which you're operating. A great example of this is Alexander the Great.
Oh, Alexander the Great, the conqueror of, like, most of the known world.
That's the one. But he wasn't just a military genius. He was a master of grand strategy. I mean, he didn't just conquer Persia through brute force. He spent years cultivating alliances, winning over cities politically and culturally before he ever engaged in a major battle.
Wow, so he was essentially shaping the battlefield to his advantage before the first arrow was even shot.
Exactly. He understood that true victory involved more than just military might. It required a deep understanding of politics, culture, and even, like, human psychology, right?
So it's about more than just tactics. It's about understanding the whole playing field, the motivations of all the players involved.
Yes, and being able to anticipate their moves and counter moves. And that brings us back to the idea of grand strategy. It's about seeing the whole chessboard, not just your next move.
It sounds like grand strategy involves a lot of different skills and perspectives.
Hmm.
What do you think are some of the key attributes of, like, a true grand strategist?
Well, I think they possess this ability to see the bigger picture, kind of like Athena with her owl, always looking in all directions, seeing what others might miss.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah, and they're incredibly adaptable, able to adjust their strategy as needed, recognizing that a rigid, inflexible approach is, well, often a recipe for disaster.
They're comfortable with uncertainty, with not having all the answers up front.
Exactly, and they embrace creativity and ingenuity, understanding that sometimes the most effective solutions are the least conventional ones.
So we've been talking about grand strategy in the context of history and some pretty impressive historical figures. But how does this apply to us today? How can we cultivate those grand strategist qualities in our own lives?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's one of the things I find so compelling about Greene's work. He takes these, seemingly lofty concepts of military strategy, and he brings them down to earth, showing how they can be applied to everyday challenges.
So instead of thinking about battlefields and armies, we can think about our careers, our relationships, even our personal goals as the arenas in which we can deploy strategic thinking.
Exactly. For instance, imagine you're facing a difficult decision at work. Instead of just reacting, emotionally or impulsively, a strategic approach would involve taking a step back, like we were talking about. Gather all the information, consider the potential consequences of each option, maybe seek out advice from trusted colleagues, even mentors.
It's like taking that strategic time out, right?
Yeah.
Just like those timeouts coaches call in the middle of a game to reassess the situation, adjust their game plan.
Exactly. And just like in sports, sometimes the best strategies involve anticipating your opponent's moves. What are their motivations? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Understanding these things can give you a real advantage, even in situations that seem, purely personal or emotional.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads, to only see what we want to see. Having that outside perspective, like you said, can be really invaluable.
It really can. And this reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about Greene's analysis of the Iraq War.
Oh, right. How even with the best intentions, leaders can make strategic missteps. especially when emotions run high.
Exactly. Greene suggests that the decision to invade Iraq, it was influenced, at least in part, by this desire to right what was perceived as a past wrong.
A kind of unfinished business from the first Gulf War.
Exactly. And of course, the emotional climate after 9/11 that need to be seen as strong and decisive, it definitely played a role too.
So it's a reminder that even when we feel passionately about something, it's crucial to, like you said, take that step back, examine our motivations, and make sure that our actions are aligned with our long-term goals.
Right, exactly. And this applies to all of us, not just world leaders or generals. Whether we're making decisions about our careers, relationships, or even just our day-to-day lives, that ability to pause, reflect, see the bigger picture, it's essential for avoiding those tactical hell traps and ultimately making choices that lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive. As we wrap things up, is there one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today?
For me, it's that empowering realization that we don't have to be victims of circumstance. By embracing a more strategic mindset, by cultivating those Athena-like qualities, wisdom, adaptability, foresight, we can become the architects of our own lives, navigating challenges with more clarity, purpose, and ultimately achieving greater success in whatever arena we choose to play in.
I love that. So, next time you're facing a challenge, big or small, remember what we've discussed today. Take a deep breath, channel your inner Musashi, maybe tap into a little Athena wisdom, and start plotting your path to victory. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.